He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
The reason that Phil and I survived longer than anyone else ever has is really because of our knowledge, our training. You know, we were search and rescue mountaineers. We were the guys that rescued everyone else.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mulligan, and in this episode of Sports History NZ, we meet a man who's experienced almost unimaginable conditions. In 1982, New Zealand was gripped by the story of two climbers trapped in a storm on Aoraki Mount Cook. For a week, friends and family didn't even know if the two men were alive. But as the record-breaking storm continued to rage, rescuers attempted to find them. Mark Inglis was one of those climbers, sheltered in a tiny hole in the snow, hungry, cold, and waiting. I asked him if this was the moment that defined his life.
Yeah, I guess it was. I always say I've got my gold standard for change, and that was on Christmas Eve of 1982. Because at 9 o'clock in the morning, that was when I had both legs amputated. And I'd have to say that the best person to ever have their legs amputated is probably a 23-year-old young mountaineer.
Really?
Because you, you've spent your life, to get to where you are. I'd been climbing since I was 12 years old, seriously since I was 15 or 16. And you put yourself in a positions where, if you don't do something right, you might die. And so a double amputation, well, that's just, it's another mountain. It's another route to climb, really. And so it's that you take that attitude into it, and that was the real gift that probably Phil and I both had, was that we'd been climbing since a young age, and it just gives you that attitude to take things on.
Yeah, Phil Dill was your co-climber, and you've said before he was sort of he's the strong silent type. He's probably the less famous name among your duo, but you went through it together. Had you climbed Mount Cook before when you attempted it in 1982?
Yes, yeah, several times, and we weren't even planning on going to the summit. We were just planning on going to Middle Peak. Quite often when you're climbing these mountains many times, once you've done one summit, you don't necessarily have to go to the summit anymore because you're climbing a route on the mountain. And for us, it was to whip up the East Ridge, get to Middle Peak, whip down a few abseils off Porticole, and we would have been home free. But obviously that didn't happen.
No, what did happen?
Well, we topped out, and we knew we had a 24-hour weather window, and we had to get back for work. It was the timing was tight. We were climbing light and fast. We struck some pretty difficult ice going up the East Ridge, so it took us a lot longer than our concept of just running up it. And so when we stuck our nose over the top at about 6 in the evening, we realized that the weather report was 12 hours out. And so the weather, the big front coming across the Tasman Sea was slamming into Cook. And we'd been climbing up in the lee, so we didn't realize the wind was as bad as it was. But we did realize that we couldn't climb down the way we'd come up. It would have taken too long. And so we just had to try and get down the summit ridge for, I don't know, just 150 meters, perhaps 200 meters, 300 meters, and a few abseils, we would have been home free. But the wind just absolutely nailed us. And I guess anyone that plays in the mountains in New Zealand, or at sea, in fact, it's the wind that's the king. It'll suck the heat out of your body at hypothermia, or up on top of Cook, it'll just blow you straight off. So you got to get out of the wind, and that's what we did.
Were you scared as that front came in and as your options dwindled?
Oh, it was too busy to be scared as we started going down. The real fear, I guess, that sort of came in on us was when we were about just down onto the wee shoulder underneath the middle peak, and we knew that we had to get out of the wind immediately because it was just sucking the life out of you. And luckily the middle peak bergschrund, the crevasse that's always there, we found a wee hole in it and crawled in. And as soon as you did that, your fear drops away because you're out of the wind. But then I guess over the ensuing days and in fact weeks, it's a roller coaster of fear and confidence, of but that's what you train for. I
Mm.
think the reason that Phil and I survived longer than anyone else ever has is really because of our knowledge, our training. We were search and rescue mountaineers. We were the guys that rescued everyone else. So if we didn't know what to do, no one did. But probably even more importantly, is we had 100% total faith in the team. We knew we would be rescued. Our only job was really to stay alive.
Gosh. What do you mean by an ice crevice? What are we picturing here?
The crevasse, the Bergschrund, the crevasse up there, it's a split in the ice but because ice doesn't bend very much, when it needs to move, it splits, and so all of those glaciers that you see are covered in crevasses. But right up high, just under a peak, will be the first crevasse, the Bergschrund, and that's where the ice splits away and starts moving downhill. But it's constantly changing. It's being topped up and in Middle Peak Boogs Run, the crevasse that's there. Years earlier, a group had sheltered in it for several days before being rescued. When we went by, there was just a hole in the ice about, oh, I don't know, just like a wee tunnel that you could crawl through, and there was an area about the size of underneath a desk in there, and that was our home for the next 324
Oh my
hours.
gosh. For some people, I would say myself included, even the idea of squeezing into that in stormy weather would be freaky enough, let alone staying there and making a life there. But as you say, that's something that you were used to doing. You knew what the right thing to do was. How prepared were you for 14 days of survival?
Totally unprepared, Jesse. Totally unprepared. We were climbing light and fast. When we crawled into Middle Peak Bergstrand or as we called it, Middle Peak Hotel, about 7 that evening, we had five Shrewsbury biscuits, a wee sachet of Raro, I think a small can of peaches, perhaps,
Come
and
on.
that was all the food that we had. And so we knew we had to get out of there. And every day we tried, every few hours we'd try and get out. One of us would be laying inside, the other would crawl out onto the slope, and you get flicked around like a kite, and you crawl back in, and then a few hours later you'd try again. And then after about 3 days, we started to get frostbite in our big toes. And then after 5 days, because we had no calories, when you're lying dead still at minus 20 or minus 10, you're burning the same number of calories as a rider on the Tour of Southland, Jesse. So, 6,000 calories a day. So,
Really?
as
Your
good as
body's trying to hit, using them trying to hit you up, is it?
yeah, as good as a Shrewsbury is, half a Shrewsbury doesn't cut the mustard
Oh,
really. So
no.
I went in there at 71 kgs and I came out at 39. So,
Come on.
you it's your body working to keep you alive.
Yeah.
And we knew, and so we also knew that after the fifth day we couldn't climb out ourselves. And so all we could do was to do everything we could right to stay alive until we were rescued.
You had a radio?
No, we didn't have a radio until the seventh day. And the
Oh,
in the eve in the evening of the seventh day, the weather cleared, or the cloud cleared. The people at the bottom could see where I'd screwed my helmet, I put an ice screw and put my helmet on just outside of the ice cave because it was blowing so hard. I knew it wouldn't get covered up. And you can see Middle Peak Hotel from the front deck of the Hermitage. There's a big set of binoculars there you can look through.
really? Yeah.
You can look straight in the front door. And so we knew that as soon as it cleared, people would know we were there because
Yeah.
everyone knew us so well. They knew that we weren't dead around the bottom, so we were probably hiding there. And as soon as the weather cleared, the wind stayed up. And so Ron Small did this amazing piece of flying in his Squirrel, his helicopter, Hotel Whiskey Whiskey, and they weren't able to rescue us right then and there, but they were able to drop us a bag, and in that bag it had a sleeping bag, it had a wee bit of food, it had a Primus to try and melt some water because it was renal failure that was killing us really, but it also had a radio. It had a two-way radio and also a little transistor. Two-way radio lasted about 18 or 24 hours before the batteries went flat. I probably left it on in the hope that we'd hear that they were coming to get us.
Yeah.
But the little transistor that worked because every evening and they'd send a message to us via Radio Scenic Land, so it was tuned to that, and so we could listen in every night to hear what was going to happen the next day.
That's pretty special. Is that the plan, or did you just, they told you they can do that with the two-way?
Yeah, that was the everything was done on the fly. This was all new territory to all of us. Both to Phil and I, to the people down the bottom. It was and the real worry, the thing that Phil and I worried about the whole time was that someone would get hurt or killed trying to get us. The whole reason, we were part of the professional search and rescue team at Mount Cook. We were some of New Zealand's first professional athletes. We were professionals because we could make the right decisions. We didn't have that emotional connect when that can perhaps trip
Yeah.
you up, in search and rescue. But lo and behold, I had to be rescued by my own search and rescue team, so it was there was a lot of emotion involved as well.
Well, tell me about the Air Force attempt to rescue you.
Well, they weren't coming to rescue us. They were coming up. They were using the Iroquois because the Iroquois didn't operate very well right up at the top of Mount Cook. It was used to ferry people in and out of an area on the Empress Shelf, which was sort of directly below us, perhaps 500 or 600 meters below us. And it's a big snow and ice shelf, and they'd built a sort of a forward base in there, a huge big snow cave. Up in Middle Peak Hotel, we couldn't make a snow cave because it was hard ice, so you couldn't dig in. But down below, they were in the snow, and they built this huge, big sort of forward base, and they were flying fresh staff and my own search and rescue team in when it turned upside down and landing, and it landed on its nut. So um, phenomenally, no one was injured really, and in fact they pulled the helicopter off a few weeks later, and I've actually been privileged to be at Aoraki and actually see it fly again in the years gone by. So us Kiwis, we can rebuild anything, uh, including Phil and I.
after you after you'd got that drop of some supplies, did you feel at that point that the hardest part was over?
Totally. That the last 6.5 days in that ice cave was far harder than the first seven because you have that expectation of rescue that they even put Anne on the radio, which in some ways might have been good, if we weren't going to survive. But it's like you're late for work, It's so and it takes away your focus. You have to really work hard to keep that focus that your job is to stay alive and to do everything. Phil and I were just so lucky because we were so different. We wouldn't have normally climbed together. The reason we were climbing was to get to know each other because we were going to be partnered up for the summer. And so, we're quite different. And so that really helps, because you can bounce things backwards and forwards between each other to try and make sure that you make the right decision. And that's the sign of the ultimate team, really, isn't it?
And you're fighting a physical battle at this stage as well as a psychological, emotional battle, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, we had severe frostbite. Our feet had frozen. Or in fact, probably what was worse was when we got the sleeping bags that allowed us to survive without hypothermia. Our feet probably went through freeze-thaw cycles. So that was the death knell for our feet. In the last probably 3 or 4 days, or certainly the last 3 days, last 2 days, I'd got a chest infection as well, and you're starting to get a bit delirious. So, yeah, everything sort of adding up. So to be rescued on that morning of the 29th of November, in the early hours of the morning, that really was a lifesaver.
Sounds like that cold front lasted a while.
Well, we had the luck to climb into the longest spell of bad weather in New Zealand history, mate.
Really?
It was the start of El Nino, really, in New Zealand. And so the weather pattern changed because normally it's a nor'wester followed by a southerly, and then you have clear, still air for a day or two, then a nor'wester followed by a southerly. And those southerlies never came, it just stayed westerly. But luckily, a matter of hours after we were rescued, the weather came in again and went bad for 19 days.
Can you tell me about the
Yeah.
rescue day? If you've just tuned in, by the way, I'm talking to Mark Inglis about that period in 1982 when he was stuck in a crevasse with a fellow climber, and 14 days later, if you can imagine it, they are rescued. And what happens that day?
We knew from the little transistor radio that they were going to make an attempt and if the weather was clear in the morning. And so Phil and I just prepared ourselves. And, it was in the early hours and just after daylight, you could hear the helicopter above. The wind had dropped. Um, Don Bogey was on the end of the fixed drop, a system that, in fact, I helped invent. So I got to be the first person to be actually rescued
Yeah,
by it. So that was
great.
lucky in many ways.
Yeah.
And Don was able to crawl into the little ice cave, put me into what we call a Bowman bag, which is just like a soft envelope, flipped me on, and we popped out and was able to be lifted off and taken down. Then he flew back up and was able to clip Phil in and bring Phil down to the Empress Shelf. We both sort of got into the helicopter and flew down to the park headquarters, and it was like seeing Bogey's face. It looks like Father Christmas, and it felt like Christmas Day, really. We got put out onto sitting up. There's no way we were going to lie down. We're pretty stubborn, and so they allowed us to sit up on the stretchers from the helicopter pad into the park headquarters, and we could see a lot of people around, and so we were wondering, what's the story? And so we spent a few hours or quite a bit of the day in the park headquarters as we were being assessed before we were loaded into an ambulance and driven to Christchurch, sitting up still, I'd have to say. We'd had a banana zap, a banana milk. We'd They wouldn't let us have a beer, much to our chagrin. So was And my wife wasn't there. She was waiting in Christchurch, waiting at Burwood for when we arrived. But all of our friends were there, all of my mountaineering friends, the whole search and rescue team. And we started to come to understand that it had been a bit of a big thing. We hadn't even thought about it. We hadn't thought about the fact that all New Zealand was focusing on it. And it wasn't until we made the ambulance stop in Fairlie on the way to Christchurch and buy us a Christchurch Star, the afternoon paper at the time. And on the front page, there's this big picture of a snow cave, Inglis and Dill rescued, and it had this big picture of a mountain craft snow cave, and we both looked at each other and thought, "Gee, I wish we were in that."
Yeah.
We were in a hole that we couldn't sit up in and couldn't lie down in, it was like, and so that's when it really sunk in. And when we got to Burwood, the TV cameras and everything was there, thankfully Anne and Lucy, my daughter, who was 10 months old at the time, were there. And then the sort of the long process of recovery started, really.
Just out of interest, when Don shows up in the crevasse, did you know that was coming that day, or was it suddenly just a face appearing out of
We were
nowhere?
expecting him. We were all prepared, waiting for him. We'd heard
Okay.
on
Yeah.
the radio the night before. So we're search and rescue professionals. We were trying to do as much as we could to
Yeah.
self-rescue, and to get ourselves ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you in pain?
No, frostbite's a funny old thing. It's insidious because once it goes numb, you forget about it, and but the pain comes with the edema, the swelling behind the frozen part as your body's trying to push its way into it, and then as it thaws out, then it becomes this insidious thing, sort of a mix between tingling, stinging, and throbbing, and it just sort of gets worse and worse and worse. It's never super painful, but it's absolutely continuous, and it's very difficult pain to um, to work with. To have your legs off is a real relief.
Well, tell me about that. When did you get that news, and what was your reaction?
Well, we were watching our feet rot. Phil and I thought that we knew we'd lose our toes, so we were hoping that they'd chop them off early, and we'd be back at Mount Cook by Christmas to start climbing again. It's an occupational hazard for mountaineers, so.
Yeah.
But it came rapidly to understand that, so much of our feet had been so severely damaged, and then they got gangrene. And so we had to battle with very, very strong antibiotics. This is 1982, so the instruments that they were able to use were pretty blunt, really. And so they were doing a lot of liver damage and the likes. And so we rapidly came to understand that we were going to have our feet off, but then to understand that you have to have them all 5.5 inches, 140 millimeters below the knee, that was a fair old shock. But we had time to reconcile it. So by the time Christmas Eve that morning came along, it was just cut them off and let us get out of here. It really was that there is no choice. So if there's no choice, then let's deal with it.
You had a pretty good doctor by the sounds of things, good at setting your expectations.
Yeah, we had lots of very, very good people in Burwood in 1982. Stu Sinclair, Sally, our registrar. One of the other registrars came in and he stood at the end of the bed and he said, in a few days you're going to have your legs off, and I know you're in a rush to get going. But just remember, it's going to take 6 months before, you can really do what you need to do. And it's going to be a couple of years before you can really understand how much more you can do. And that was pretty much on the money. Even though we were only 11 weeks in hospital in total. And then I was back at Mount Cook, as a double amputee, um, duty ranger, really. And so it was very quick, but we were in a hurry and the frustration from then onwards and has always been. In fact, I've just got a new set of legs that I've trying to break in at the moment, and it's just never is nothing's fast enough, Jesse. It's every now and then you just have to stop and look behind and see how far you've come just to make sure that that you're motoring along. And
Well,
so,
spoiler alert, it didn't slow you down, or perhaps it slowed you down, but you ended up achieving more than you might have achieved otherwise, including Everest in 2006, the first double amputee to achieve that. I want to make sure we have some time at the end of our chat to talk about your charity Limbs for All, because I know how important it is to you. Can you tell me a bit about it?
sure, it's when I was on Everest, actually, I raised around about 70,000 US dollars. And to be able to manage that, Anne and I set up Limbs for All. I'd been working in Cambodia with the amputees, but more importantly with the School of Prosthetics, with the new young prosthetists over there, thanks to the Cambodia Trust in New Zealand. That's transformed into what they call Exceed now, Exceed Worldwide. In 2019, we'd rebuilt limb centres and do all the usual things, but in 2019 we discovered that the 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 all support for youth with disabilities and schooling in Cambodia had been pulled. And so somebody needed to step in. And so in partnership with Exceed, we stepped in. And so we've been at it for 4 years, almost 5 years now. We've still got another year and a half to go. So far, we've invested 65,000 US dollars in the program, and we've put 1,041 young people with disability through the process, and we provide them with the uniforms,
Gosh.
with everything really, with all the stationery, a tablet during COVIDs because they couldn't go to school, so they needed to do it online. A bike if they need one to get to school. We provide the school with help to make it accessible, make it inclusive. And then we also support the family as well with cash, about 20 US dollars a month. And we've got 220, and I was just over there in December actually, giving out the at the start of the new school year. And it's just so humbling the one thing I've always understood is that to get $1 million smile, you only have to invest a few dollars, and that's the essence of it.
Is it too tough a question to ask you what you learnt from that experience and what you've learnt in your life since then?
Oh, we can always do far more than we can ever think that we could do. It's that what's that T.S. Eliot quote? Um, Basically, you never know how much you can do until you actually try, and that's the real essence. The essence is that um, you know, I always say, attitude determines your altitude in life, and that's very much it. And attitude is absolutely critical. All my corporate work that I do in India and other places around the world, it's all around the attitude to change because that's the really defining thing. And once you understand the power of attitude, then that's the thing that's enabled both Phil and I to really do the things. Phil's climbed more mountains than I have. He's been president of the New Zealand Alpine Club. Once a climber, always a climber, Jesse. But also, it's that understanding that you can take the lessons that you learnt on a mountain, or even in fact in an ice cave, and apply it to the rest of life. And hopefully that's the lessons I help share around the world.
That sounded good when I said it, but I should check with you that that's true. Have you achieved more, do you think, through this experience than you might have if you hadn't?
Well, unless someone waves a magic wand and gives me a set of legs, I wouldn't know.
No.
If you ask all my climbing friends, they'll say Inglis is still the lippy, cheeky, attention deficit person he's always been. But what I've been given, I think, Jesse, is a whole range of different opportunities that I perhaps wouldn't have found otherwise. And by the same token, I've lost a lot of friends in the mountains. A lot of people haven't survived. It's a very dangerous sandpit to play in. And so, in many ways, I guess the answer to that is yes, but it's because of the opportunities that it's created.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sports History NZ, and special thanks to Mark Inglis for being my guest. Sports History NZ was produced by Melita Tull, Ayana Piper-Helian, Sally Ward and Sam Hollis. The podcast was put together by Justin Gregory. Tim Watkin is RNZ's executive producer of podcast and series. And there are plenty more amazing stories just like this one from our sporting past for you to follow and listen to. You can find them at Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, or wherever you found this podcast.